Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from Algiers called The Underside of Power. I remember covering Algiers' self-titled debut album on this channel 2 years ago, and I remember the most prominent thought running through my head. Since the dawn of post-punk and noise rock in the late 70s, it should not have taken this long to get a record like this. I think a part of this was inevitable thanks to the internet and the rampant cross-pollination of genres, but still, it's not like there weren't common through lines that could have enabled more of this fusion with a noisy grind of post-punk with a raw blend of gospel, soul, and blues. Sure, there had been those who have brought in more of a gothic or symphonic sound to the scene, but this was decidedly different, black, southern gothic, in a much different yet no less potent tradition, backed up by the utterly fearsome vocals and the writing of Franklin James Fisher. And it was a sort of fully formed debut record that of course landed a spot on multiple of my year-end lists for albums and songs, but really the potential represented by this band was far more thrilling to me. And not just because when hip-hop looking to sample gospel eventually finds out that this exists, it's gonna cause a sea change. It's just coming, just wait for it. No, what drew a lot more of my attention was knowing that their sophomore project, The Underside of Power, was gonna necessarily get political. And this should not surprise anybody. Much of their debut painted them as harbingers of doom and a brand of violence that only even perceived between the lines of those not willing to look. And that's where we get the exceedingly well-framed and frighteningly relevant racial commentary that showed up on that album. But also, given what happened last year and some of the heightened sensitivities now in 2017, yeah, I had the feeling the gloves were coming off. And considering the mountains of critical acclaim that this record has received, even more so than the debut, I was really excited for this album. So, what did we find in The Underside of Power? Well, unsurprising to pretty much anyone, this record is absolutely awesome. But the reason why this review is coming out today instead of a few days ago is because I really wanted to give this a few more days to really sink in. If it was indeed better than that self-titled album, or was more of a lateral move. And after many listens, I think it falls more in the latter category. Overall, some of the individual songs are stronger, and this record easily is one of the strongest starts that I've heard all of 2017, but at the same time it can feel a little bit underwritten, a little more scattershot, and maybe even a little bit more broadly sketched than the focused, relentless deep dive that was the self-titled debut, even if you could make the argument that the threat is much more of a multifaceted one in 2017 compared to 2015. And that is one thing that must be placed in context immediately going forward. While Algiers as a debut was focused solely on the black experience, The Underside of Power, it aims more broadly by necessity. Oh, make no mistake, racism does come up in sharp relief on songs like Cry of the Martyrs and especially Cleveland, the album's centerpiece, which serves as a point where the murdered and forgotten black men and women come back at the end times to face those who slew or forgot about them. But on the flip side of that, you have Walk Like a Panther, which is a pretty searing indictment of those who betray or ignore black culture for the escape of the upper class and respectability politics. And it's also one of the most distorted and heavy tracks on the entire album. It is a monster of an open, a hell of a way to start things off. But that's another thing that needs to be emphasized here. For as political as this record can get, and be sure that it does, there's a greater sense of well-reasoned philosophy, an attempt to not just confront the banality of evil, but also showcase how one might fight against it, provide some vestige of hope that wasn't really quite there on the debut. Madame Rieux is a Camus reference to a woman at peace with the idea of approaching death, but now being confronted with the possibility that there's nothing coming after. And then there's the closing track, The Cycle, The Spiral, Time to Go Slowly, highlights how violence just curls in back in around itself to reach that final end, where finding some true love is ultimately needed to pull out of that death spiral, which is nicely mirrored in the closing moments of the song with a slightly brighter segment, which is a similar snapback to a brighter reality that came back on the debut, except appropriately it feels a little less pronounced here. And that hope is important to stress, especially right now in 2017, because while you have songs like Death March highlighting how people can be turned away from the rich, robbing them blind, to those of the same or lower class, just different ethnicity, to punch down those balancing out capitalist and fascist impulses. Although it was kind of amusing how much Animals showcased how the self-righteous but ultimately incompetent flailing of some of the alt-right and those in power buoyed by them, and yet how importantly it was to not sink to their level, hold the moral high ground, and remain on your guard. But then you have a song like the title track, which showcases that hope can indeed persist and come when you have extreme imbalances that must naturally correct, or some vestige of a conscience behind him for an average man, where fascists who commit crimes in the banality of following the worst orders, they can still have a haunted sleep awaiting them. They can't stifle their conscience entirely. There is some vestige of hope there, and I really like that. In short, Algiers yet again showcases why they're one of the smartest and more insightful groups making political commentary that's irrelevant right now. But how does all of that translate to the music? Well, for me, I think while some of the highs are truly tremendous, some of the lows, they're a little bit frustrating, especially in the back half of this album. I could nitpick a little bit surrounding some of the drum production. I don't quite think that Matt Tong, formerly of Block Party, is utilized as much as he could be, especially when you have some beats that are plenty programmed and placed a little bit too close to the front of the mix, or that on some of the more ruckus tracks the vocals can sound a little bit more buried than they should be, or that Algiers uses a weird throaty backing vocal on songs like A Murmur, A Sign, which I don't quite like as much as I want, but again, those are scattered little complaints. The larger issue though comes in pacing, because this record can definitely feel front-loaded, which isn't quite a bad thing. Between the distorted crunch of Walk Like a Panther, the huge hook and bass hand clap groove on Cry of the Martyrs, and the staccato guitar switch up against the bass groove on the title track, these are goddamn incredible, damn near transcendent, especially with Franklin James Fisher's huge, yet remarkably versatile and expressive delivery. Hell, with the synth tones on Death March, it's not far removed from an upper-tier Depeche Mode song, and I really appreciated that. That's where we get to the killer, smoky guitar interlude on Madame Rieux, or the riotous punk side of Animals, or the demented, haunting breakdown on Cleveland, or the noisy bounce of the closing track. There's a lot to love about this album, and yet in the final third of this album, you get two instrumental pieces, and while neither of them is precisely bad, they are a little bit of a momentum killer, especially when between them you include Hymn for an Average Man, which is also pretty slow-paced. Again, I like both these pieces. Bury Me Standing has a goddamn saxophone on it that sounds phenomenal, but maybe better placement throughout the album, or maybe include lyrics on one of them to flesh out some of the themes a little bit more. Again, I don't want them to feel that underwritten, or at least for Plague Years, this faded out naturally instead of the rather abrupt ending there, but as it is, they could have been better utilized, and again, it's a minor nitpick around track sequencing. But again, as a whole, this record is tremendous. Easily one of the best and most relevant albums of 2017, and yet the broad thoughtfulness of the political content and how deep they ultimately dive without tying them explicitly to any one political figure doesn't feel rushed or forced, and yet accompanied with the real gravity and sense of populism that gives it a huge weight. It checks off all my political art boxes. And again, the fact that Algiers have fully developed and only seem to be enhancing this gothic blend of gospel, soul, post-punk, and noise, a sound that very few, if any, are doing this well right now, makes this band one of the most unique and potent, really, of the past couple of years. For me, easy 9 out of 10, and if you haven't heard it, you definitely should. For a lot of people, I think it's just the hammering gothic groove that they're looking for, so definitely check this out. It's a message of hope. We all could use one. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I really wanted to get this in before a mid-year review because this album was so damn good. I really enjoyed it a lot. But again, mid-year video is coming up. I'm also looking to do a bit of a catch-up video, which I will be covering a lot of albums there, so just friendly warning about that. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to buy the album, and I highly recommend you do, links in the description below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious for more diehard Algiers fans, or maybe even fans coming over from Block Party, will think about what they put together here, because Bad Tong is integrated well. I think it could be integrated a little bit better, though. A little bit more live drums would have been perfect here. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation? If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling, link to my Patreon is right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week in the higher tiers you guys get to add records or even movies to that schedule. More details right there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.